So welcome everyone. This is Phil Terry. Really glad to have you here on this November 2nd, 2017, excuse me. We have a great webinar planned for today, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But I just want to start by saying from all of us here at Collaborative Gain, we want to thank you for an outstanding set of council meetings in San Francisco a few weeks back. We got a lot of great feedback. Some of the most exciting feedback was seeing new members talking about how they jumped in and really opened up and got a lot of help. Our net promoter scores were the highest they've ever been, and we couldn't be more grateful for your continued participation and your leadership and support in building this community. One key area of focus for us is what happens between the meetings. And we kicked off a new program of webinars this year, just like the one we're having today. And in fact, I'm really excited that my longtime friend, Jay Haynes, who's the CEO and founder of Thrive, is bringing what I think it will be a great webinar to us today. We're doing more of these. In fact, next week, Victor Cho, who is the CEO of the rebooted Evite, is going to talk about building a 60% female tech company. 60% female tech company, and Evite has turned that business around in part by the way he thinks about diversity and divergent thinking. That should be a great call. I hope you come in for that. The final thing I'd like to say before I turn it over to my colleague David Forrest, who's going to moderate the call and formally introduce Jay, is in addition to the webinars and small dinners, another element of what we call the 365 program, what happens 365 days a year, how can we help you tap into the wisdom of this carefully curated community of leaders, is something we call confidential calls, If you are a member, then you can request a confidential call. Here's how it works. You tell us your question or topic. So for example, recently one of our longtime members was promoted to president and CEO of a publicly traded software company. And so he was both a first-time CEO and a first-time CEO of a publicly traded company. So he reached out and said, hey, my question is, what are the questions I should be thinking about in this new job? And can you put together a group of CEOs who can advise me? So we did. We went out and found 4 CEOs who had been or are CEOs of publicly traded companies. And we got the calendar. We did all the logistics. We scheduled the call, and then we moderated the conversation for an hour. This is a private, not recorded, confidential call to talk through a specific question or challenge. It was tremendously helpful to him, and we love doing these. We want every member to request one of these in the next 12 months. If you are a member of the councils, you get to request a confidential call. It can be on a tactical issue like, hey, we're switching our analytics platform and need some help in kind of thinking about how we approach that question, to something like, I'm in a new job and I'm wondering how should I make this work, or anything else. It could be anything that you need help with. So please think about that and approach Brittany or David, your moderator, me, any one of us, doesn't matter who, and tell us you think you'd like some help. And by the way, if you want some help to even frame what the question is, we can do that with you as well. So I wanted to make that plug. Think about that. We want you to request one of these in the next 12 months. All right, let me now turn it over to David Forrest. David is the general manager of the councils. He's been doing, I think, just a terrific job, he and the team. He will moderate today's webinar and formally introduce my good friend Jay Haynes. So David, let me turn it over to you now.
Great, thank you, Phil. And thank you to everybody for being here today. As Phil said, I'm David Forrest, the General Manager for the Councils, also joined by Brittany Crown, the Director of our 365 program here at Collaborative Gain. How's it going, Brittany?
Great.
Excellent,
Thank
excellent. So Brittany is your go-to resource for all of our webinars, RFH calls that Phil was talking about, small dinners, happy hours, and so forth. If you'd like to participate in one of our events or even help host something yourself locally, let Brittany know. You can email her at brittany@collaborativegain.com and she'll coordinate with you on any of the programs that we run year-round outside of the retreats themselves. Brittany is also a critical part of the retreats, organizing all of our roundtables that happen as an optional activity the night before our retreats begin. And we had some really successful roundtables in San Francisco in no small part thanks to Brittany's great organizational efforts. So thank you to Brittany for all the work that she does. All right, let's get started. As Phil said, we're excited to be joined by Jay Haynes from thrive.com. It's THRV.com. I'm sure Jay will have that on his slides. Jay is a many-time entrepreneur, having created or led more than 7 different companies in the last 15 or 20 years. Jay did his undergrad work at Brown University and his graduate work at Harvard Business School. And we're thrilled to have him here today to talk about jobs to be done and how you can beat Apple and Google, which may sound like a tremendous dragon to slay, but Jay's here to tell you how to do it. Jay, how are you?
Great. Thanks, David. Thanks, David, Brittany, and Phil for having me here. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So before I turn it over to Jay so that you can see his slides, I just want to go over really quickly a couple of logistics for people who are in the GoToWebinar software. You have a little orange arrow. If it's pointed to the left, you want to click it so that it points to the right and expands so that you can see all of the controls available to you. Everyone in the call is muted by default. You can go into full screen mode if you like, which will take over the entirety of your screen, as you imagine. If you want to speak your question or comment towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but you can raise your hand. There's the ability to raise your hand and say that you've got a question, or you can just type the question to me into the question window, and I will ask Jay for you. If you'd rather not have your voice on the line, we understand that as well. That's fine. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay. Just give me a second to turn over the keys here, make Jay our presenter. And Jay, you should now have the keys to the city.
All right, great. All right. Great. Is the hopefully the slide is showing?
Looks great. Yep.
Great. Well, thanks, David and Brittany and Phil for having me here, and thanks everybody for attending. Today, we are going to talk about jobs to be done, and specifically, we're going to use an example of how you could use jobs to be done to beat Apple and Google. And Apple and Google are, of course, the 2 most powerful and successful companies in the world, and this would seem like an impossible task for a product team if you set out to try and beat Apple and Google. But specifically, we're going to show you how to beat it using a method called jobs to be done, which I think many of you may have heard of. And the idea is that you can use this same method in your markets to beat your competition as well. And the basic idea behind jobs to be done is deceptively simple. As Clay Christensen of Harvard Business School puts it, the idea is that your customers are actually not buying your products. What they're doing is hiring your products to get a job done. And we'll explain this in much more detail. But this key insight is important because your customers' struggle to get the job done is what causes a new purchase. So we want to understand this struggle in detail in order to understand what is going to cause a customer to make a purchase. So today we'll look at what jobs to be done is, why it's valuable, and how your teams can use it in your markets. So let's start with what is it and why is it valuable? Well, we all know that building high growth products is hard. Revenue growth is extremely hard to accelerate. And this leads to the problem we call the growth gap. That teams project new revenue growth and new equity growth, but when the actual falls short of the projected, the growth gap causes problems which can ruin careers and companies. This is an extremely bad situation that can destroy a company's equity value and lead to failure. But the growth gap can also lead companies to miss potentially much bigger market opportunities, which is also bad because it allows competitors to take over your market. So why do companies fail to achieve their projected or their potential growth? The growth gap results from what we call the product catch-22. Product teams are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. They work hard on building, marketing, and selling their products. But history is full of examples of the product catch-22 leading directly to failure. For example, these three once dominant market leaders had teams working hard to build, market, and sell their products. Not only did they fail dramatically, but they each failed to capitalize on the three biggest market opportunities in history, as we'll show. Apple, Google, and Facebook became three of the largest companies in history in the exact same markets as BlackBerry, Britannica, and Kodak. The product catch-22 can be lethal, and a recent study found that 40% of the Fortune 500 companies will no longer exist in just 10 years. And this high failure rate is true for new products as well. As startups are representative of new product launches, 63% of startups fail to even return one time their investors' capital. So what is Jobs to be Done? At its core, it's a way out of this product catch-22. And Jobs to be Done is different because it focuses your team on your customer's job rather than your product. It aligns your teams with what your customer needs to accomplish. And today, companies are more customer-centric and customer-focused than ever before. They do focus groups, research, interviews, and surveys, for example. And yet, the extinction rate of Fortune 500 companies is actually accelerating. So Jobs to be Done is different because it focuses your teams on your customer's job rather than your customer. In our customer-centric world, this seems counterintuitive. But it works because the struggle to get the job done is what causes customers to make a new purchase, as we'll show in detail. So as a product team, we know our mission is to satisfy customer needs better than competitors in our market. This is a non-controversial statement. It's really what we do as product teams. So this brings up some fundamental questions. The first is, what is a customer need? And does everyone at your company agree on what a customer need even is? Well, if your team doesn't agree on what a customer need is, you're not alone. Research found that 95%, almost all companies, don't even have an agreed upon definition of what a customer need is. So without an agreement on needs, teams use customer requests, sales requests, feature ideas, or technologies as inputs into the product development process. This is a problem because all of these inputs are unstable and changing sometimes rapidly over time. With this traditional process, when the new launch fails to generate growth, your team is left to guess, iterate, and out here in Silicon Valley, we call it pivoting, using more changing and variable inputs. This eventually leads to a company's death spiral, and it's why products and companies ultimately fail. So Harvard Business School found that the difference between product success and failure was the degree to which customer needs were fully understood. And CB Insights, not surprisingly, found that the #1 reason for product failure was that there was no market need. So Jobs to be Done is different because it gives us quantifiable, actionable, and stable definitions of a customer need, as we'll see. So the first reason to use Jobs to be Done is to avoid the product failure death spiral with a better understanding of customer needs. So our mission to satisfy customer needs in a market brings up a second fundamental question, which is, what is your market? What is a market? Well, using the traditional market equation, it's usually some variation of product price times buyers. And this seems to make sense. It's the business school 101 textbook definition of a market. Seems to make sense. How big is your market? Price times buyers gives you the market size. So for example, in 2007, a product team at Microsoft calculated that the iPod market was huge. It was a $30 billion market based on a $150 price point times 200 million iPods sold. Seems to make sense, and they wanted to enter this market and take share. So Microsoft launched the Zune into the iPod market, expecting to generate revenue and equity growth. The Zune was actually a great product. It worked well. So why did the Zune fail? It failed because there is no such thing as the iPod market. Defining a market based on a product or technology is like driving by looking in the rear view mirror. it can be lethal because products and technologies will always change. The iPod market is now rapidly approaching $0. And there is no iPod market because customers don't want iPods any more than they want records, cassettes, or CDs. Any product-based definition of a market is fatally flawed. What customers want is to get a job done. In this case, consumers are hiring products to create a mood with music. This is a stable job, and it will remain stable over time. A job to be done is a goal a customer needs to accomplish, and unlike products, jobs never change. This idea goes back to the 1960s and Theodore Levitt, who was famous for saying that customers don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. And this concept is true in any market. For example, in a B2C market, drivers don't want maps or GPS or navigation apps, they want to get to a destination on time. In a medical market, surgeons don't want stents or angioplasty balloons, they want to restore artery blood flow, which is a job to be done. And in a B2B market, CIOs don't want blockchain, they want to enable secure data use. So this is true in your markets as well. Your customers don't actually want your product, they want to get their job done. BlackBerry, Britannica, and Kodak are historical examples, failed because they defined their markets incorrectly based on their products. There are no keyboard device, encyclopedia, or film markets. These are all products that changed over time. But there have been and always will be markets to execute jobs while mobile, to find information, and to share memories. So the second reason to use jobs to be done is to avoid lethal market mistakes that lead directly to product, company, and career failure. The market will always win. So since our goal, again, is to satisfy customer needs better than competitors in a market, we have to answer a third fundamental question, which is, who is your customer? In traditional methods, companies often use personas to represent their customers. And this seems to make sense because customers are actual people with personalities. For example, in a consumer market, you might create two personas, one male, young, urban, another female, older, and rural. And companies do this in B2B markets as well. They'll identify verticals, for example, CPG or financial services companies, SMBs, or Fortune 500s. The problem with traditional methods is that demographics and personas are not the reason people struggle to get a job done, and they do not cause people to buy products. For example, could a young urban male and an older rural female both struggle to get to a destination on time? And the answer is yes, of course. But these two people would never fall into a traditional persona-based segmentation. In this case, these two different demographics and personas both make frequent and unfamiliar stops. So they're in the same underserved customer segment based on their struggle to get to a destination on time. Could CPG and financial services companies both struggle to enable secure data use? Again, the answer is yes, but product teams would not traditionally put these two demographics or verticals into the same segment. The reason these two B2B customers are in the same underserved segment is because they both struggle to enable secure data use because they make frequent network upgrades. Unmet needs in the job identify underserved customers, as we'll show in more detail. The key customer in any market is the job beneficiary, regardless of their demographics. The job beneficiary is the person who benefits from successful execution of the job. And in some markets, there is also a person actually executing the job, known as the job executor. In B2C markets, the beneficiary and the executor are often the same person. For example, consumers benefit when they drive themselves to execute the job of getting to a destination on time. But in many markets, the beneficiary and the executor are different. For example, patients who need to obtain a blood sample use phlebotomists, and employees use IT managers to enable secure data use. This is important because executors can be part of a current solution and thus can change. And markets evolve to remove executors. For example, consumers now don't have to drive themselves with Lyft, autonomous vehicles, Uber, et cetera. And we have a company who's building a microneedle array so patients can draw their own blood. And of course, cloud services have eliminated many IT manager roles in enabling secure data use. So this is why in Jobs to be Done, a market is defined as the group of job beneficiaries and the job they need to execute. This enables us to identify underserved customer segments who all struggle to get the job done in the same way. So the next reason to use Jobs to be Done is to ensure that you're serving the most valuable customer segment in your market, regardless of demographics or personas. So now that we have a good idea of what the market is, who the customer is, we need a good product strategy. But what is product strategy? Oh, sorry, I think some of the slides didn't advance here. Let me make sure we're on the same. Yeah. So what is product strategy? At its core, a strategy is how you beat your competition by satisfying customers. So companies often use Michael Porter's famous 1996 definition of strategy. He, of course, is the Harvard Business School professor, famous for analyzing industries to determine competitive strategies. And Michael Porter said, the essence of strategy is choosing to perform activities differently than your rivals do. These are activities your companies perform, and supposedly they are the core of your strategy. But Michael Porter's definition is outdated. Performing activities differently than rivals is not enough. For example, Apple, Samsung, and LG each perform activities, but they've had very different results. Apple has 98% of the profits in this industry. And why is this? It isn't because they perform the activities differently. It's because Apple's iOS satisfies customer needs differently than Android. Samsung and LG on the margin both satisfy customer needs in the customer's job in the same way. In 1996, Michael Porter didn't have the customer's job to be done in his strategy toolkit. In Jobs to be Done, a successful strategy satisfies customer needs differently than your competitors. So in Jobs to be Done, a product strategy is making three choices: which job beneficiary to target, which job to be done to target, and which product features you are going to build to satisfy customer needs differently in the job to be done. So the next reason to use Jobs to be Done is to pick the best product strategy that will win in your market with the least amount of risk. So that's a little bit on what is Jobs to be Done and why to use it. And next we'll show how your team can execute the Jobs to be Done process in order to beat Apple and Google.
Hey Jay, before we move to that, I've got a question from Peter Nush from Comcast. And let me unmute Peter and let him ask this, because I think it's a good question to ask before you go forward.
Hey, so thank you.
There you go, Peter. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Can hear you perfectly.
Awesome. So as you were talking through the definition of the classic definition of the market being price times product quantity, if that's bad, and I don't disagree, but assuming that's bad, following the logic, how does that affect how we should be thinking about finding product market fit?
That's a great question. And we will show that in the next section, which is we want to size the market correctly. That's the first step. And then we want to figure out what is the customer value in the market. In other words, when we think about product market fit, it's, are you delivering enough customer value? In other words, are you getting the job done better than the competitors to encourage the customer to switch to a new product? And that's why we all switch. There's enough customer value in a new product that helps us get the job done that we switch. And we get very specific, as we'll show in the next section, about measuring that customer value before you invest in product development and sales and marketing, which is really the expensive part of the process, is the downstream investment. It's a great question.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Peter.
Yeah, out here, as you guys may be well aware, VCs and startups like to talk about minimum viable product. Well, we think that's actually the incorrect way to think about product market fit, because products can be viable, especially with today's advanced technology. You can build anything that will work. It's viable, but is it valuable? You want to calculate how valuable it's going to be to a customer before you even invest in building it. And that's what Jobs to be Done is, as well as a system of de-risking the investment you're going to be making in a product roadmap. It's a great question.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake. Yeah, let's keep going, and we'll have some more questions after the next section, I'm sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this is the fun. So how would we beat Apple and Google? Now we've got these core concepts. Let's try and beat Apple and Google. And specifically, let's try and beat them in the maps market. And this might be the most competitive market in the world. The two largest players with the largest market cap, with enormous amounts of cash and resources and brand and distribution, et cetera. We're going to try and beat Apple and Google in this market using Jobs to be Done. So the first thing we want to do is, who is the beneficiary? And we know the beneficiary in this market is consumers. And we want to look at not the applications itself, not the products, but what is the job? And in this case, we know the job is to get to a destination on time. This hasn't changed over time. It's stable. There'll be different solutions that emerge, of course, but we know that it's a stable job that consumers need to execute. So the first question we want to ask is, how much revenue growth can we generate in this market? Well, if we looked at this market using the traditional definition of product price times the number of buyers, the maps market would be the definition of an unattractive market, because map apps are free. In other words, it would be a $0 growth opportunity unless we wanted to generate an advertising business model, which we're not going to talk about. But if we wanted to sell a product in this market, it seems totally unattractive. Well, we size markets differently by using the customer's willingness to pay to get the job done. So the opportunity is not based on your product's price, as we saw with the iPod and the Zune, but it's your customer's willingness to pay to get the job done better. So we asked job beneficiaries what they would pay to get the job done, and we plot this on a need curve of willingness to pay versus the number of customers. It looks like a demand curve, but it's willingness to pay versus customers rather than price times product quantity. So the area under the curve is the market size. And the need curve helps to identify if there's a bigger premium or low-cost growth opportunity in your market. And it helps us identify hidden market opportunities for growth. So in our example market, there is a premium segment that is willing to pay a premium price for a solution that helps get them to a destination on time. And this is based on actual data. This is real data. So why do growth opportunities like this exist? Because there are unmet needs in the customer's job to be done. So the next step in using Jobs to be Done successfully is to identify unmet needs, identify competitors' weaknesses, and then ultimately to create high growth product ideas. So let's look at identifying unmet needs and competitor weaknesses first. So we still have to answer our first fundamental question, which is, what is a customer need? In Jobs to be Done, a customer need is an action a customer must take using some variable required to execute the job successfully. So I'll explain this in more detail. To identify customer needs, we first identify job steps. And job steps tell the story of what a customer needs to accomplish to execute a job successfully. And there are 6 main types of steps in any Jobs to be Done. There's definition, preparation, execution, monitoring, modifying, and conclusion steps. So for example, when getting to a destination on time, it follows this pattern. Estimating the departure time is a definition step. Setting the route is a preparation step. Driving to the destination is execution. Assessing if the destination will be reached is a monitoring. Resetting the route if needed is a modification step. And parking the vehicle is a conclusion step. And like all jobs, this job is very complex. In total, there are 16 steps for a driver to get to a destination on time. So job steps are our first important starting point, because steps tell us how we can identify customer needs. So let's look at an example. We know that drivers need to plan the stops for their day. This is a preparation step. In this example, this is a typical busy professional's life. It includes meetings, appointments, and errands. And we know that a need is an action a customer must take using a variable required to execute a job step successfully. So in our plan the stop step, when we analyze this step, we can identify customer actions and variables. For example, a driver must determine the optimal sequence of the stops. They have to determine the routes to the stops. They have to determine what times the stop is open. So this is extremely powerful because we now have a customer need that is a metric independent of any solution. So customer needs in the job, like the job itself, remain stable over time. This is never going to change. And the action in a need should be done quickly, and the variable should be accurate. As a result, customer needs are metrics that we can measure. And every job has between 6 and 16 steps, and each step generally has between 5 to 10 different variables or customer needs. So this is why every job has about 100 different customer needs. Jobs to be done are extremely complex. And at its core, a job is a goal that a customer is trying to achieve and a series of complex actions and decisions that a customer must take to achieve a goal. So for example, these are actions and decisions a driver must take in just 6 of the 16 steps to get to a destination on time. And because, like the job, they are independent of any products, these customer needs will remain stable over the time. So your product team now has a stable target to hit. So next we have to identify which needs in the job are unmet, because unmet needs are the reason that market growth opportunities exist. So a need is unmet if a customer's action is not quick and if the variable is not accurate. And this is important because if a customer can only execute the job slowly and inaccurately, this will cause customer anxiety. And customer satisfaction is a function of speed, accuracy, and anxiety. We want to help them get the job done quickly and accurately so they're not worried about achieving the goal. So here's our typical busy professional's day with meetings, appointments, and errands. And we know one of the needs in the job is to determine the optimal sequence of planned stops. So we can assess the speed and accuracy of determining the optimal sequence by using competitive solutions in the market to try and satisfy this need. For example, how would you determine the optimal sequence of stops in your day using Apple Maps or Google Maps? Well, you would enter destination A to destination B, calculate the route and time, enter destination A to C, calculate the route and time, replan to go from A to C first if that was more efficient, and repeat this process for every possible combination in your day. And when we assess the speed and accuracy of satisfying this need with Apple and Google Maps, it is clearly slow and inaccurate because a driver might never figure out the optimal sequence even after minutes of trying. We now have a measurement of the customer's struggle, which causes anxiety because they might not be able to execute the job successfully. And this is a competitor weakness based on an unmet need in the customer's job to be done. And this is just one weakness based on one need. And there are 106 needs in the job of getting to a destination on time. Now we know our goal, to build, market, and sell a solution to help the customer overcome the struggle to get the job done faster and more accurately in order to reduce their anxiety. This is what causes a new purchase. Customers purchase solutions that make executing the job fast, accurate, and worry-free.
So now, Jay,
we can verify.
Just to pause for a second, you talk about anxiety, and maybe when I hear 106 different unmet needs with each job to be done, I get anxious as a guy who wants to provide a great product and service. And how do you react to people who have an overwhelmed feeling about, oh my gosh, there's so many different factors, how am I going to nail this?
Yes, that's a great question, and that is why we like Jobs to be Done, is it helps product teams overcome that anxiety of trying to figure out the problems that their customers have.
Got it. Okay.
So the first step is to figure out all the needs. So if you were to compete with Apple and Google, and remember, at this part in the process, we haven't had any ideas. So sometimes we like to joke, with Jobs to be Done, our competitive advantage is we have no ideas, because we're not starting with product ideas. We're just trying to break down the problem to see where the struggles are. And once you have those, those needs identified, you can now stack rank them to figure out where to focus out of the 106.
Great.
And that's what we'll go next. Yeah, great. Great. So now, to answer David's question, we want to figure out which needs are important but poorly satisfied. And we can do this with surveys in the markets. The importance of a need is a function of how critical the need is for successful execution of the job and the job step. And satisfaction, as we saw, is a function of speed, accuracy, and anxiety. So when we do a survey, for example, in this segment, 97% of drivers said this need was important. So we give it an important score of 9.7. And only 12% of drivers in this segment said that current solutions satisfied this need quickly and accurately. So we give it a score of 1.2. And to prioritize needs, we calculate this difference between importance and satisfaction scores for each need. And we weight for importance, which creates an opportunity score that enables us to prioritize each customer need in the job. And any need with an opportunity score of 10 or higher is an unmet customer need. And this is extremely powerful because now we have a quantifiable, unchanging, and actionable definition of an unmet customer need. This shows exactly where your team should target to beat your competitors and accelerate your revenue and equity growth. So the final step is we need to create high growth products. We've identified unmet needs and competitor weaknesses, and we can use jobs to be done to build, market, and sell a product that will win in the market. So let's look at the final step of generating ideas. We know, again, that to create high growth products, we need ideas to satisfy customer needs better than competitors in the market. And we know that successful product strategy satisfies needs differently than our competitors. So we need to find a different position in the market than our competitors. This is how we avoid the Zune mistake. The Zune was not different enough from the iPod to encourage customers to switch. So we have to be different and we have to be better. So how do we do this? In jobs to be done, competitive position is finding job steps that have unmet needs not satisfied by competitors. So in our Apple and Google example, we can analyze which needs in which job steps they are satisfying. And we can clearly see that there is a position in this market that is open to us. Apple and Google do not help busy people plan their day when they have multiple destinations that can be optimized. And this is how we will message our different position, using unmet needs in the job steps. In our example, our new product, which we'll call On Time, will have messages based on optimizing your busy day. For example, On Time, your day optimized. On Time automatically arranges your busy day in the optimal order to keep you on time, confident, and relaxed. Jobs to be done based messaging focuses on how your product is going to help the customer overcome their struggle to get the job done faster, more accurately, and worry-free. So now that we've identified unmet needs and we have a competitive position in the market, the final step is to generate product feature ideas. And traditionally, companies and product teams start by brainstorming new ideas. This is fun and creative, and there's only one rule, which of course, there are no bad ideas. But this is absurd because there's literally an infinite supply of bad ideas in the world. So we don't want to brainstorm. The goal for your team is not to generate a lot of new ideas. The goal is to generate the best ideas to satisfy the unmet customer needs. And there are criteria to judge ideas. The criteria are, of course, the unmet needs in the customer's job. So let's generate an idea to satisfy this need faster and more accurately. When we start with an unmet need, we can generate valuable ideas quickly. We will call our idea Sync and Optimize, and it will enable a user to sync their calendar and optimize the sequence of stops in their day. In our new product called On Time, we will include an optimization algorithm to determine the best sequence of stops for the user based on their meetings, appointments, and errands and traffic through different times of the day. The user simply clicks Optimize, and On Time will automatically and instantly organize your day to optimize your schedule and your stops. So we have satisfied this need better than Apple and Google because we've moved from minutes and potentially totally inaccurate with Apple and Google to accurate in a second for a driver to determine the optimal sequence in a busy day. And in jobs to be done, customer value is getting the job done faster and more accurately to reduce customer anxiety. And we measure customer value by calculating how much more satisfaction the product idea will deliver to the unmet customer needs. And this is how you can de-risk your investment in a product roadmap, by measuring customer value for each release before your team builds, markets, and sells the new features. And you can use this customer value to more accurately project your revenue and equity growth, because market share is usually distributed unevenly, with market leaders taking disproportionate share of a segment. And share is a function of creating more customer value by getting the job done faster and more accurately than your competitors. So with jobs to be done, you can identify and size larger market opportunities, and you can generate better ideas to deliver more customer value to your competitors, and you can accelerate your revenue and equity growth with less risk. And this is the ultimate goal of jobs to be done. In our MAPS example, if we target unmet needs in the $2 billion segment of underserved drivers, we can estimate that we can generate 800 million in annual revenue and almost $2.5 billion of equity value for our shareholders. This is the purpose of jobs to be done, to be able to project revenue and equity growth more confidently before investing in product development. So thanks, everyone. It's great to be here, and hopefully we can have a lively Q&A session.
Jay, thank you. That's great. If people have questions, you can either raise your hand or type your question into the questions panel, and I'll call on you. But Jay, I'll kick us off with a question. Just one of the things that Steve Jobs is revered for, keeping with the Apple theme, is this idea of satisfying the unspoken need or the unmet desire. And I wonder how you think about that vis-a-vis jobs to be done, and really identifying it. Is part of the process being creative and imaginative in just imagining what they are going to want and need, or is it really identifying what you already know that they need?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love this as a question of, do customers have latent needs? And I really love this that you brought up the Steve Jobs point, because Steve Jobs actually never said customers don't know what they want. That's actually a misinterpretation. What he said, if you go back and look at the quotes, is customers don't know what products they want. And that is certainly true. Do not go to your customers asking for product ideas. And a good example is you could ask a ton of cooks and chefs what products they want, and they would never come up with a microwave. I still don't understand how a microwave works. It's some magical human thing that happens, right? They're not specialists. So they don't know that they want a microwave, but they absolutely can tell you everything that they need to accomplish when preparing food for a meal. And that's a job. So you can analyze that job and absolutely figure out what needs there are in that job. And the idea of latent needs, this is where it really it does companies a disservice, because then they'll say, well, I'm going to create this great product and I'm just going to show customers that they need it. The Fire phone is a great example of this. Jeff Bezos had lots of crazy ideas about the Fire phone. You may remember Amazon's attempt to enter the phone market. And he even had his colleagues saying, wait a second, what is this doing? Why is this valuable? And he just had a vision. And the product was a total failure, because at the core, he thought that customers didn't even know that they would want this product. Well, customers know what they want. People know what they're trying to accomplish. So you really want to disregard the idea that there are latent needs out there. That's led companies astray for a while.
That's a great answer. Thank you. So we've got a question from Barry Mizrahi. Barry, I'm going to unmute you. I think you should be unmuted now.
Hey, yeah. Oh, thanks. Cool. So my question is, and this was great, by the way. Thank you. It was really very, very interesting. I was wondering, was there an assessment made of how much people are willing to pay for the service of kind of, optimizing scheduling en route? You might have glossed over it, but I was just wondering if you could maybe get into that a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. So, and I know we did go over it pretty quickly, but our market sizing techniques we've been developing for a long time, and we get very specific asking about what you'd be willing to pay to get the job done. And all those dots on that plot are all the answers. It's a survey of about 300 respondents. And what we do is we're asking them how frequently they're executing the job. So in that case of that segment, those people are executing the job every day. They're traveling salespeople, they're delivery people, they're medical supply reps. There's a whole number of different reasons why they're executing the job every day. And then we asked them what they would be willing to pay per month. And it ranged from about $5 to $10 per month. So that's how we can do the math, is multiplying the number of those underserved customers and their willingness to pay to get the job done better. And then that's how we size the market. And then, of course, we use that information for pricing the product as well. Yeah, great question. Hopefully that answered it.
No, that was great. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Barry. Bill Skeet's got a question. Bill, how are you?
Hey, good. Hey, great presentation. My question is, have you applied this the jobs to be done approach to existing products, and how is that different? Most of what you talked about is an approach of assessing new opportunities, but of course there's lots of current products out there. So just would like to get your thoughts on, is there, how does it differ, or how do you modify what you talked about when you apply it, or if you apply it to the existing product?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. And most of the companies we work with have existing products and product portfolios. So that is our starting point. So the process is the same at the beginning, is we identify the job and the job steps and the needs and figure out which ones are unmet. And then we assess the company's current products to figure out what customer value they're delivering today and how can they create more customer value with their existing product. And there's three different scenarios. One is the best scenario, is their product actually helps get the job done better. They're just not messaging and telling companies this. And by the way, we find this a lot, that there, a lot of products are very complex and have lots of features. And the company hasn't been telling customers that they're satisfying the needs, because a lot of messaging and positioning is focused on, we've got new technologies, we've got more features. But what customers want to hear is you're helping to get the job done faster and more accurately. So that's the first scenario. The second scenario is there are very easy things to do in your product roadmap that you can prioritize that are addressing the most unmet needs in the market where the customers are struggling. And those are great because they're very low risk. You can build them, you've got the team, you just have to reprioritize your product roadmap to get those things out sooner rather than later. The third scenario is where you've identified unmet needs and you've looked at your product, and you might need R&D. You might not have figured out how to actually satisfy the unmet needs. In this case, we would need an optimization algorithm, which is no small feat. You need to figure out traffic and times a day, where people are going, how to optimize it, et cetera. That's not a non-trivial problem. So in that case, you'd want to do some R&D. And in some cases, you might need an entirely new platform. And that's where products shift when you've come to the end of the life of the product platform. And that's where the iPod went away. Right when when Microsoft launched the Zune, Pandora launched with an entirely new platform, no hardware, just an application that was going to stream over the web. And when they launched, they were signing up 90,000 people a day because they were satisfying unmet needs in creating a mood with music. And of course, then eventually everything went to streaming. And so you can recognize when there's platform shifts as well. One final thing I would say about that, especially with larger companies that we work with, there might be opportunities for M&A as well. If you recognize that your current product is only getting a few of the job steps done, you might want to go look for companies that are actually satisfying other job steps that would be complementary to your current product portfolio. And then that's a good opportunity to use jobs to be done to look for M&A opportunities. Because over time, the winners in a market get the whole job done. That's where companies dominate markets.
Great. Thank you, Bill. All right, Phil, I know Phil had a quick comment that he wanted to make, and then we've got a handful of additional questions for our last 10 minutes. Phil, are you still there?
Yeah. First of all, Jay, great work. I thought this was a terrific presentation, and I appreciate you coming and sharing this with us. This is really good stuff. My comment mostly was I wanted to encourage more people to ask questions, but I see already that James Anderson has jumped in, and Peter's got another question. So let's go forward with the questions, David, and let's have James ask his next.
Great, thank you. All right, James, you are unmuted. Good afternoon.
Okay. Yeah, good afternoon. Interesting.
James is from MasterCard, by the way. Jay, just so you know.
So I haven't spent any time looking at JTBD. Is there any, I guess a key step seems to be actually defining the job, because everything sort of flows from that. Is there a technique or any pointers in how you define the job? Because I could imagine defining it too small or too big, and then you're boiling the ocean. I mean, how do you, it seems like there's kind of an art to defining jobs at the right level of granularity and crunchiness that it's addressable, or that you can actually, I mean, like, just talk me through how you actually go and say, these are the jobs that we're actually going to go after, or the 3 jobs we could go after.
Yeah, that's great. We could do a whole nother webinar on just that.
Yeah,
but it's super, super important question. And we actually show some examples where, we have enormous amounts of respect for Clay Christensen, of course, and Phil and I studied with him, and, an amazing guy. But if you look through his work, he often defines jobs incorrectly. And the reason is the job really is the main goal the customer is trying to achieve. So there's some problems in there. One is you identified it. What is the right level of abstraction or granularity? I mean, ultimately, we all want to live a happy life.
Right, but how do we help people do that?
That's right. That's right. So you have to break it down to something that is manageable, and also that really is a market. That's the key idea, is that the job is the market. So you want to have it be defined with the right scope and a level of abstraction. So there's some key things. Is one, it's usually an action verb and an object, because it's some goal you're trying to achieve. And it's also got to be independent of solutions. So, and we see companies get the job statements wrong all the time. So play MP3s would be a good example of something that isn't a job, and that's because it contains a solution. It contains an action and object, but it contains a solution. And then sometimes people define the job, but it's really a job step. So, monitor your heart rate. Well, that's really one step in optimizing your health. And even in that case, of course, optimizing your health is something we all want to achieve, but that's so abstract that medical markets are so complex that you want to get more specific. So you might define it as optimize your health with CPOD, or with diabetes, or with cancer, to get more specific about the actual market, the number of people benefiting from successful execution of the job. It's a great question, and we always start with defining the job correctly. And we have, techniques that we can do another webinar to help you guys, figure it out. But it's a great question.
Great. Hey, Jay, one. I know we have a couple more questions, but I don't know if you've thought about what Stuart Butterfield might have been thinking about in terms of the job to be done for customers when designing Slack. Have you put any thought into how that might have been applied? That might be an interesting case, because we're all using Slack now, and it certainly I think fits within your framework. Yeah,
that's great. That's great. I'm a little bit ashamed. I'm not a Slack user, so, but of course I know of Slack. Yeah, and I think those are great examples, and we could spend more time. It'd be great to have a discussion amongst people here, what people think the job is. But those types of jobs, which are in the category of communication jobs, of trying to coordinate people to communicate to achieve a goal, are always really great markets, because communications are complicated, and they're inefficient, and generally time consuming. In that specific example, I haven't done enough work in it to figure out what the actual communication is, but we we consider those like job domains, like optimizing health is a job domain with lots of jobs in it, and communication is a job domain, and really fascinating. And obviously they satisfied some unmet needs that related to communication being faster and more effective and more accurate. Great question.
Great. Thank you, Phil. So we've got 4 more audience questions or comments that we want to get to. We're going to go back to Peter Nush, who's got a follow-up. Let me, where's Peter here? All right, Peter, you're unmuted.
Hey there. So I'll make this quick. This is a great example of how you can approach jobs to be done to solve consumer needs. How do you think about, or do you have any examples about how you do this for a business-to-business service, for example?
Yeah, that's great. So we love business to business. We actually do more work in B2B and medical markets than we do in consumer. We do consumer as well, but B2B is great. We love B2B markets. In fact, we've mapped out 30 jobs from different functions within B2B markets. And of course, the ultimate job for a business and for a CEO is to create equity value. But again, that's kind of a highest level job. So we break that down into different functions by product, by sales, marketing, HR, et cetera. And those markets are really, really complex. Just the main 30 B2B jobs, represent an enormous opportunities for improvement. And if you break those down even further, then you get to all the job steps it needs. And jobs really are a goal that a customer is trying to achieve. And every goal, as we kind of demonstrated with getting to a destination on time, is really taking information and making decisions. So there's complex information inputs required, and there's complex decisions that need to be made to achieve the goal. And it's really kind of an optimization problem. And for B2B, that is, it works even better in B2B. It works, Jobs to be done works really well in complex markets where there's lots of complex decisions and lots of information. I wouldn't use Jobs to be done for jewelry or fashion. An engagement ring is a very emotional product, but it's just functionally not that complex. It's a piece of metal and a rock. I'm not sure how you'd use Jobs to be done to create video games or a better screenplay for a movie. But in markets where there are complex information and decisions, it's really, really powerful.
Great. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
All right. We'll go to Julie Francis now. Julie is a moderator here at Collaborative Gain, as well as having her own UX practice. Julie, how are you?
I'm great. Hi, guys. Jay, thank you so much for this presentation. This is great. And I have a question for you about personas and jobs to be done. Just wondering, earlier in your presentation, you suggested that if you're using the jobs to be done methodology, there's really not a need for personas. And I'm just wondering if you ever see a need for personas, whether in the beginning when you're generating, you're identifying people's needs, or whether you've got the needs and you're brainstorming solutions. I also work in the jobs to be done field, and what I find is that when we're using jobs to be done in isolation, we're only getting part of the picture, and that the context can really help us come up with better solutions. So I like to go back to the quarter-inch drill example. So in the very famous quarter-inch drill, we say, people don't need a quarter-inch drill, they need a quarter-inch hole. But I would argue that the context and the motivations for that person who needs that hole matter a lot. So for example, is this for a contractor who's really focused on getting this done very accurately and very quickly? Is it for somebody who's a do-it-yourselfer who loves to redecorate their house but isn't super comfy with tools but is willing to learn? Is it for somebody who's crazy busy, who's like, you know what, just get this picture on the wall for me. I don't need a hole, I need this picture hung. And so in that scenario, once you understand more about the context and the motivations of these people, it actually has a significant influence on how you think about brainstorming solutions once you have the need recognized. So I would just love to have more conversation about personas in conjunction with jobs to be done, and if you ever see a role for the two in tandem.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. And I don't want to say we want to do away with personas, because anything that can help product marketing and sales teams empathize with real people and real customers, that's the goal. And we just want more empathy around the customer's struggle to get the job done. that doesn't necessarily constrain you. So let's use your example of the homeowner who's modifying their home. I think that was the example, or the tinkerer. Well, is that person young and they have their first home and they're trying to tinker with it, or are they old and retired? And you might miss opportunities by constraining yourself to those personas up front. Now, it can help you empathize with the customer to give the situation, but that older customer and that younger customer both might be underserved in exactly the same way. And if you just segmented by age or length of home ownership or some other demographic, you might miss opportunities to put those people in the same underserved segment. Now, when we do the quantitative work, we do include demographics. So we ask people how old they are, or businesses, we ask, for SMBs or they large businesses, what vertical they are. We do ask those demographic questions, so they can be useful. But when we do our segmentation work, and that could be a whole nother webinar as well, we use that quantitative data to see if it's causal. In other words, does the demographic determine that those people are underserved? And way more often than not, what determines if they're underserved isn't whether they're a new homeowner or a retiree. It's really that they struggle to get the job done. So personas are great. I mean, we want everybody on the product teams, of course, to be relating to real people, but we just think that you don't want to shut off opportunities when there are opportunities that aren't determined by demographics.
Great, thank you.
Let me jump in. I know, David, we're after time and we have another question in a moment. But Jay, you keep referring to that could be another webinar. If there's interest in the community, are you open to coming back and doing a couple more discussions? Yeah.
Oh, yes, me. Absolutely. No, I'm happy to keep the conversation going. I love talking about this stuff.
Okay, great. All right. So, David, go ahead.
Got a question from Kirsten Thayer. Hi, Kirsten.
Hi there. I'd love if you could elaborate a bit more on the B2B, but in the enterprise space. We work in a unique market where we have a number of beneficiaries with enterprise products, but some of those are both external clients and some are internal users. And I'm curious if the process is quite different or if we generally can apply the same approach.
Yeah, that's great. And that's one of the nice things about the approach and the method is that it can be applied for internal or external customers. In fact, I'd say it's not a huge percent. It's maybe 15 to 20% of the companies we work with are actually building products for teams internally. We have some large banks that are building tools for people within the bank to execute their jobs. They're internal development teams. We're seeing that more. They're building products internally, and the process is the same. That's what's nice, because a job, since it's a goal and it's independent of any solution, it can be applied internally or externally. That's a great question.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kirsten. And we got one more question from Lauren Antonelli. Lauren, Lauren, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
All right, thanks. And thank you for the presentation, Jay. And I actually can second on what others are talking about doing a subsequent webinar about getting the job right. I think that would be really helpful since that's such a crucial step. My question is kind of going off of earlier in the presentation, you mentioned that even though companies are customer obsessed, they're still failing actually at a higher rate. So I wanted to just see if you could talk more about when you think pulling in customers fits in the job to be done, as well as is it that our conversation with customers are too product focused rather than job focused?
Yeah, great. So let me make sure I understand the question, which is when do you bring the customers into the process?
Yeah, for the jobs to be done.
Yeah, that's great. So of course, I'm a huge fan of Phil's book. So I would say we should include customers all throughout.
There you go.
A little pitch for Phil's book. Yeah, we think it's super important to have the customers early on. Now, we've developed some techniques that help companies do this much faster, and we can talk about those more. But the the longest lead time stuff at the beginning is setting up customer interviews and doing those interviews to figure out what the job and job steps are. And we used to train companies to do that, and it's a skill that's very unique and hard to get good at, because if you're starting from a blank piece of paper, tell us what the job is and what are all the job steps, customers are going to look at you funny. So you have to know how the techniques to do it. But we've developed some techniques that make it faster for teams to identify the job and the job steps, and then to verify those very quickly with customers. And that's faster because you're just doing verification of steps and needs rather than just with a blank piece of paper trying to figure out what they are.
Great, thank you so much.
Got it. That's great. And I think actually, Michelle Desprez, you may have one more comment before our last comment before we close. Michelle, welcome.
Oh, hi, thanks. I was just adding it to the comments as a response to one of the questions, but where we found personas helpful is in the design phase. So in the example that you gave with the maps, the personas don't make sense at the beginning, but at the end, when it's the difference between two different users and what technical capacity they have or what environments they might be working in, that's when personas have helped us.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a great observation.
Yeah, that's really nice. I don't want to do away with personas altogether. Just make sure you're right at the beginning in the process. We're identifying underserved segments based on the job.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you to everybody who stood around after the hour passed. We appreciate Jay doing some overtime with us and for being here presenting the Jobs to Be Done webinar for our Collaborative Gain community. We'll work with Jay to get these slides out to you if that's going to be possible, and maybe to do part 2 of Jobs to Be Done and drill down into some more specific questions and maybe even do some use cases with our community for the products and services that you're working on. So we'll try and coordinate something like that with Jay for the coming weeks and months. Jay, again, thank you so much for sharing your thinking with us. Again, if anyone wants to reach out to Jay, it's jay@thrive.com. That's thrv.com. I'm sure I'll be happy to talk with you about anything that you've got. And we look forward to seeing you again here soon, Jay. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Brittany and Phil. And thanks, everybody, for attending.
Fantastic. Have a great afternoon, everyone.